Then we have here Justice Popov, who worked at the European Court of Human Rights. We are going forward with some questions regarding democracy, human rights, cultural diplomacy, international, many fields of internal relations. And it's the first question I would like to ask, sir, that regarding the human rights cases within Europe, we know that there are a lot of refugees fleeing from human rights violations from Middle East, from all over the world, let's say. What do you think about the human protections of human rights in the European Union for these people who are fleeing the tyranny and despotism and all the kind of human rights violation? Can you tell something about this on these people?
Legally, the main problem is that the European Convention on Human Rights does not regulate the situation of refugees. There are other instruments. Therefore, we should turn to the system of the United Nations, protections of refugees, etc. The practices differ in various countries. There have been favorable attitudes toward refugees, but there have been also unfavorable and problematic behavior of certain authorities in some countries. It is not easy to say something in general. I think it's a huge problem which calls for solidarity of the European nations and especially within the European Union. And to my mind, there has been a lot of effort to help those people, despite all the unacceptable patterns of behavior, such like returning ships from the Mediterranean islands to the African coast, etc., etc. It's a complex problem which should be treated by the governments, but also by the United Nations and the NGOs and all people of goodwill.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sam. I will go with the second question. That what's your opinion regarding the war crimes? I mean, it's claimed the claimed war crimes in Ukraine and the compliance according to the international laws.
The main problem of the war crimes in Ukraine, unfortunately, when there is a war, there are inevitably war crimes, is the mechanism how to establish whether war crimes were committed or not, and then how to deal with the war crimes. So far, I am not very optimistic about creating of such a mechanism at the international level, but something must be done, and I do hope that in the foreseeable future a mechanism will emerge to deal with the war crimes. Of course, there are existing mechanisms, you can tell me, but as you know, they may be inefficient to some extent.
Well, thank you. My second question is also has connection with the war crimes, and that's regarding the transitional justice. What's your opinion regarding the transitional justice in the era of democracy and its morality in strengthening the basis of democracy?
That is, to my mind, because I'm a lawyer, the core question in our time in Central and Eastern Europe. I visited Ukraine, for instance, many times as an expert of the OSCE for rule of law, and I met with the Ukrainian judges, with most of the judges of the highest courts. And it is not only the question in Ukraine, but all over Europe. As you know, there are crises in certain countries, like in Poland, there was in Hungary, then in some others. It is very difficult because strengthening of democracy means the introduction of an efficient judiciary, and that is not always the case. The trouble is that the Central and Eastern European countries inherited a lot from the previous authoritarian regimes, which they cannot easily overcome. Perhaps some sort of international coordination and international assistance should do well, but I cannot think of anything in particular at this moment.
Thank you. As you mentioned about the democratic governments, I would like to know your opinion regarding the situation of human rights in countries where authoritarian governments are ruling nowadays.
That is also a huge problem because we do not know whether a Cold War has started or not. Should that be the case, then the Western countries, those who oppose the Russian intervention, not necessarily only the Western countries, will have to decide whether to follow a sort of containment policy, trying to isolate Russia, or to try with some sort of integration policy, which means influencing by way of various means, the sanctions included, the Russian government to lessen the pressure upon the population. It does not apply only to Russia, there are other authoritarian regimes. Something should be done, but it is very sensitive and it needs excellent diplomats to carry out such policies.
Thank you. Now, a little bit moving from the law and legal system. So now we are going to ask you a question about the current formation of the United Nations and what is your idea about the structure of the United Nations, and is it sufficient in relation to the problems of today, the formation and the structure of the United Nations and National Security Council?
That is also law. We are not moving away from the law. It has been mentioned in the conference. Various ideas have been put forward, but as you know, the problem is the possibility of blockade within the UN Security Council. You can reform the composition of the Council, and there was an idea to give more power to the General Assembly, but as the reporter said, the US would never agree to that, and not only the United States, many other countries too. The big powers would not accept that. A new mechanism should be introduced, but step by step, and it also tackles very sensitive diplomatic issues, and once again it needs not only cultural diplomacy but classical diplomacy and very skillful diplomats to make a break and go forward with the negotiations. But it is not going to be easy at all.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Now going back to European Court of Human Rights, I have a legal background, so I prefer to talk about it very much. That sometimes the court issues directions to member countries, where the member countries have to determine how to achieve those goals in the directions. To which degree you think that member countries comply with such directions?
There are no directions, properly speaking. No directions in the sense that the term is used within the European Union. The member states, as you said, must comply with the judgments. You may be surprised, but on most of the cases, the member countries, the member states of the Council of Europe that ratified the European Convention on Human Rights comply with the judgments. Only exceptionally they do not do. That is really, those are rare exceptions, but there are some exceptions. So the mechanism is such that the court issues a judgment and the member state has to comply. In most of the cases, the states do comply.
So we will conclude. We have no further questions, so we will conclude the interview with Justice Popov. And thank you, Justice Popov and Neomatullah, for being part of this.